Forget Taiwan. If the United States and China had a major conflict, the key battleground would be elsewhere. In a narrow strait, about 3,000 kilometers south of Taiwan. It's a place most people overlook, but military strategists watch with the utmost attention. A place where one event can trigger a global ripple and alter Asia's rhythm. Decide the fate of a great power. We'll explain what's at stake and why it's important next. In every major conflict, there is a place that decides more than it seems at first glance. Not the battlefield, not the capital city, not the island everyone debates about, but the point where economy, energy, and security meet. The point that can determine who will last longer and who will start to lose momentum. This point is the Malacca Strait, a strait through which a huge portion of the world's trade and energy passes every day. And it could play a much bigger role in the United States-China crisis than most people realize. In the next few minutes, you'll see why it's so important, how both superpowers could exploit it to their advantage, and what a real conflict here would look like. You're watching the channel Zahrani Tsami. Let's begin. Why is the Malacca Strait so important? The Malacca Strait is one of the most important points in the world economy, even though many people have never heard of it. It's a waterway just 3 kilometers wide in places, yet massive cargo passes through daily. We're talking about more than 100,000 ships a year, about hundreds of tankers and container giants that have to squeeze through the narrow corridor between Malaysia, Singapore, and Indonesia. And now, pay attention. About 25% of all global trade passes through here, a quarter of the planet in one strait. Energy is even more important. About 70 to 80% of all imported oil to China passes through there. Another 60 to 70% goes to Japan and South Korea. Taiwan is similarly dependent. That means if something happens in the Strait of Malacca, almost all of East Asia will immediately feel an energy shortage. When we talk about China, it directly affects its factories, production, exports, and transportation. Simply put, it affects every sector that keeps its economy running. This is not a theoretical threat. This is a bottleneck through which the lifeblood of the entire region flows. And that's still not all. Alternative routes exist, but they are slow, expensive, and can't handle the capacity. A detour around Australia will add thousands of kilometers to the journey. The Sunda and Lombok Straits are deeper, but it takes longer to sail through them, and most tankers use them only as a backup solution. In practice, this means one thing. If the Malacca Strait slows down or gets blocked, Asia doesn't have a quick alternative. Looking at the map, Sunda and Lombok seem like obvious solutions, but both routes are longer, have weaker infrastructure, and more complicated currents. For a tanker, this means a more expensive and slower journey, often by several days, and even more importantly, their capacity is limited. The Sunda and Lombok Straits couldn't handle as much traffic as the Malacca Strait. They can only handle a smaller portion of the traffic and are mainly used as backup solutions. If the Malacca Strait slows down or gets blocked, these straits can't absorb the flows that keep the Chinese, Japanese, or Korean economies alive. That's exactly why this point is strategically important for both superpowers. For China, it's a critical weakness that it must protect because without oil flows through the Malacca Strait, its economy will start losing steam very quickly. For the United States, it's a way to apply pressure without attacking Chinese territory. And this creates a space where the economy, geopolitics, and the military converge into a single point. Let's go deeper now. In the next chapter, we'll explain why this particular weakness has haunted China for 2 decades and why the term Malacca Dilemma was created. The Malacca Dilemma, a weakness that haunts Beijing. There is one place that can slow down the Chinese economy before a single missile is launched. A place that Beijing has been aware of for more than 20 years and which Chinese strategists have given a very simple name: the Malacca Dilemma. It's a problem that has two dimensions: an energy dimension and a geopolitical one, and both are critical for Beijing. The energy dimension is absolutely clear. China is an oil giant in terms of consumption, but it can't supply itself. Its own production is far from enough, and imports are a necessity for it. And this is where the problem arises. China's dependence on the Strait is extreme. Most of its oil comes through this road. If this point is even slowed down, Chinese refineries and factories will feel it immediately. And if the Strait were completely closed, the consequences would be dramatic. It's not just about a fuel shortage. It's about slowing down production, a drop in exports, and threatening the entire economic model that has driven China for 3 decades. The geopolitical situation is even worse. China neither owns nor controls the Malacca Strait. The strait is surrounded by Malaysia, Indonesia, and Singapore. And it is Singapore that has close security cooperation with the United States. Washington doesn't have to block anything here by force. It's enough to increase the presence of the Navy, create control zones, or raise the risk for commercial tankers. In modern warfare, there often doesn't have to be a direct attack. It's enough if transportation gets too costly or risky. Shipping insurers pull coverage, tankers slow, and China feels pressure without a single shot fired. The Malacca dilemma is therefore simple. China knows that its economic lifeline passes through this place. And at the same time, it knows that in the event of a conflict, it can't fully protect it. That's why it's building detours, alternative routes, and new partnerships. But the real capacity of these solutions has its limits. And that's exactly what the next chapter will be about. We'll look at everything Beijing is doing to reduce this weakness and whether that's even enough. How is China trying to escape the trap? Beijing is very well aware of its weakness. The Malacca Strait is a critical artery for it, and that's why it has been trying to create bypasses for years. Not symbolic, but real alternatives that could reduce dependence on this single strait. But reality is unforgiving. Even though China has invested billions in new routes, none of them can replace the strait that currently keeps its economy afloat. The main project is Pakistan. The port of Gwadar on the Arabian Sea is the foundation of the Chinese corridor, which, according to Beijing's plans, is supposed to connect the ocean with western China. The plan was clear: to build a road, pipelines, and a railway all the way to Kashgar, thus gaining direct access to the Indian Ocean without relying on the Malacca Strait. But here China faces a harsh reality. The corridor crosses unstable, low-security areas, and even at best, its capacity would only handle a fraction of current strait traffic. Myanmar's the second solution. China has built an oil pipeline and a gas pipeline here leading to Yunnan province, which allow it to bring in some of the resources directly from the Indian Ocean. The route is important, but again it faces limitations. Its capacity is small compared to how much oil China consumes, and the country's persistently unstable political situation does not allow for the creation of a reliable long-term corridor. The third attempt involves Chinese foreign bases and ports. The most famous is the Djibouti base, China's first naval base in Africa. From a military perspective, it strengthens Beijing's presence on the maritime routes leading toward China. Still, the main issue remains unresolved. If the Malacca Strait becomes dangerous or impassable, tankers have to take a long detour through the southern straits. China can protect its ships, but it can't change geography. The main problem is still the same. Alternatives exist, but they are slow, expensive, and lack sufficient capacity. During a major crisis, they couldn't prevent disruptions to China's energy and trade, nor save its economy. And that's exactly why the Malacca Strait remains at the top of the list of Beijing's biggest strategic concerns. And now let's move to the other side. How are the United States operating in this area? And what leverage do they have directly around the strait? That will be the topic of the next chapter. United States power in the strait. Where does America hold leverage? If China has a weakness in the Malacca Strait, the United States has an advantage here. Not because they control the strait directly, but because this entire area is located in an environment where Washington has long-standing partnerships, logistical capabilities, and military footholds. And these footholds can create enormous pressure on Beijing in the event of a crisis, without the United States having to fire a single missile. The most important player is Singapore, a small state but extremely strategic. Being at the northern entrance to the Malacca Strait makes it one of the most valuable points in the Indo-Pacific region. The United States of America doesn't have a traditional military base here, but they have access to repair docks, logistics facilities, and space for rotating their ships. The American Navy operates here regularly, which means Washington has immediate reach over all the traffic that passes through. And that's not all. Singapore has one of the most technologically advanced navies in the region, and its cooperation with the United States is long-standing and strong. The second pillar is India. Its position in the Andaman Islands and the Bay of Bengal allows it to monitor and influence all traffic approaching the Malacca Strait from the Indian Ocean. India isn't a traditional United States ally, but in a conflict with China, Washington and Delhi share common interests, not letting Beijing control this area, and that's exactly what makes India's involvement extremely valuable. The third pillar includes regional partner countries. Malaysia and Indonesia may not want to be drawn into a war, but they cooperate with the United States on securing shipping routes, sharing intelligence, and monitoring the situation around the strait. This space is ideal for Washington. It can operate, monitor developments, and raise risk levels for commercial tankers here. All of this without a direct blockade or attack. And that's exactly what it's about. America doesn't have to physically close the strait. It's enough for them to be in the right place at the right time, and private company tankers will start avoiding the Strait of Malacca on their own. It's enough if the insurance price goes up. A single unclear incident is enough. A modern strategy often doesn't work through direct bans, but through economic fear. And in such a tight space, it spreads very quickly. And now comes the key question. What if this area were hit by an America-China crisis? What would the first day of conflict in a key global strait look like? That will be covered in the next chapter. What might the crisis's first day look like? The feared conflict has begun. Taiwan has declared independence. China has launched a blockade of the island, and an invasion is hanging by a thread. The United States is responding. Fleets are moving, and the world is watching the tension in the Taiwan Strait. But beware. Strategists aren't focused solely on Taiwan. The Strait of Malacca is just as important. A place that could determine who lasts longer in a conflict. Imagine the first hours, no big battles or missile exchanges. In the Strait of Malacca, a much more subtle but dangerous process will begin. The strait won't be closed, but its functioning will be broken. Tankers will slow down, commercial fleets will start to hesitate, and insurance companies will raise risk premiums. Still, no shots have been fired there. Just more American ship activity near Singapore or a vague incident can quickly spark alarm in the crowded strait. And that's just the first wave. Scenario 1 would look like this. The United States would quietly increase the activity of its ships around Singapore and the northern entrance to the strait. They wouldn't have to block movement at all. It would be enough if they just showed up here during a time of tension. Great powers in a confined space automatically raise tension. The tanker captains would start to slow down. Commercial fleets would monitor warnings, and the first alerts would begin to appear on the maps. Every small delay would gradually affect the entire Asian trade chain. Scenario 2 would be even less clear. Incident. A small, unspecified, maybe technical problem on one ship. Maybe an unidentified drone in the air. Maybe just a suspicious ship without a flag approaching the tankers. In the Strait, where the traffic density is enormous, it takes very little. And when a sense of risk arises, the result is the same as a physical blockade. The tankers turn around, some change their route, others wait at a safe distance. Every extra hour means less oil flowing to China, Japan, or Korea. And then there's the key element: uncertainty. In global trade, it's more powerful than a torpedo. When captains don't know what's going on, when insurance companies raise prices, when news starts spreading that something went wrong in the Strait, the whole region slows down. And that's exactly what would hit China the hardest. Not a big battle, but the daily flow of energy that starts to fragment and get delayed. All of this could happen even before the first units in the Pacific even meet. That's why the first day of the Malacca Strait crisis is so important. It shows modern conflicts may not begin with explosions, but can be a battle of nerves. In this strait, those nerves are very tense. In the next chapter, we'll look at what impact a real blockade would have and what would happen if the strait became impassable for a longer period of time. What would a real blockade mean? If the first day of the crisis was about slowing things and uncertainty, a true blockade would be on another level. We're not discussing hours or days of inconvenience, but an impact that could disrupt the global economy. And what's most important, the Malacca Strait blockade would go beyond military measures. It would be mainly economic, political, and psychological at the same time. Together, these three dimensions form a force no country can endure without consequences. The main problem is energy. If the oil and liquefied natural gas tankers stopped passing through, China, Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan would have an immediate problem. China imports about 70 to 80% of its oil through this strait. Japan and Korea import around 60%. These aren't numbers you can make up for just by changing the ship's routes. Alternative straits like Sunda and Lombok exist, but their limited capacity can't handle the volume that passes through the Malacca Strait daily. Shipping companies couldn't keep up, costs would soar, and the energy market would begin to collapse. However, this would impact more than just China. Global oil prices would soar. Europe would face pricier Asian goods. Companies in the United States would face rising logistics costs. Asia would be under enormous pressure because it would lose not only energy but also time. Every day of delay in the strait means slower production, delivery delays, component shortages, and pressure on entire global supply chains. This is exactly the kind of crisis that doesn't need to last for months to cause chaos. Just a few weeks are enough. If the conflict escalated further, the Malacca Strait could become a restricted access zone. Not a complete blockade, but a controlled area where only some ships would be allowed through and others not. That's even more dangerous. China would try to break through with its tankers under escort. The United States and its partners would complicate things by having their navy present and increasing the risk. The result would be a fight for every convoy, for every ship heading to East Asia with energy. And this is where it would become clear that modern war is not just about weapons, but also about who can maintain their supply lines. The worst case would be total paralysis of the strait. Just one sunken ship, one accident, or one attack that blocks the narrow corridor is enough. Such an incident could shut the strait for days or weeks. And those weeks would be critical for China. Its oil reserves are not unlimited. At full consumption, its strategic reserves would last for several months, but during a conflict, consumption would rise sharply. Here's a detail many people don't realize. When oil reserves start to deplete faster than they can be replenished, the economy begins to slow down, and the military has to decide where to prioritize fuel, whether for aircraft, ships, or industry. And all of this shows that a blockade of the Malacca Strait would mainly affect the countries that are most dependent on this route. Here, China objectively bears a heavier burden than the United States. America can shift its routes across the Pacific. Its economy relies heavily on domestic consumption and isn't dependent on a single strait. China, however, depends on exports and energy imports. And if one narrow corridor is disrupted, the whole model is disrupted. Let's look at the final step, at what this whole story means in a broader context. Why the Malacca Strait is not just a regional problem, but a point that can move energy prices, slow down global trade, and shake economies around the world. That will be the conclusion's topic. A place that can decide a great power conflict. The Malacca Strait is a place that isn't mentioned as often as Taiwan or the South China Sea. In reality, it can strongly influence the conflict's outcome. It's a narrow point through which energy, trade, and the strategic stability of East Asia pass. And that's exactly why it's so vulnerable. In modern wars, outcomes depend not only on weapons, but also on maintaining supply lines. Who has access to raw materials, who can supply their own economy, and who can slow down their opponents. If a major conflict erupted between America and China, it would involve more than just sea or island battles. It's about who gains the edge where economy, logistics, and military power meet. The Malacca Strait is exactly such a space. A slowdown, higher risk, or one incident can impact all of East Asia. That's why Washington and Beijing are watching it with extreme attention. And why should we care about it too? A collapse in this strait would impact the entire world. Energy prices would rise, trade would slow down, supplies would be disrupted, and the rhythm of the global economy would change. All that because of a place so inconspicuous on the map. That's why understanding its significance is even more important. If you want to dive deeper into similar geopolitical scenarios, check out my other videos as well. Some of them already show how similar vulnerabilities and strategic points are emerging in other parts of the world. The Malacca Strait is just one of them, but in the event of a great power clash, it would be one of the most important.
If you like the video, I'd appreciate a like and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next ones I'm working on. You can support my work through a tip, and if you want to help the video reach more people, click on share. I appreciate it.